Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the third episode of The Agency, the new spy series on Showtime. And the episode is called Hawk from a Handsaw. So on all the other episodes, there is very explicitly someone says the title of the episode somewhere. Mm-hmm. Did you hear them say Hawk from a Handsaw at anyone in this episode? Did I miss it?
I did not pick up on it.
Now I'm going to look at... No, a hawk from a handsaw is an idiom that means to understand the important difference of facts about a subject. For example, you might say the referee clearly doesn't know a hawk from a handsaw.
Never heard that expression in my life.
The phrase comes from Hamlet, William Shakespeare.
Well, I've read Hamlet, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, well, quite a different. Yeah, we were reading part of Hamlet this week, by the way. This is another digression. We were reading part of it because my wife's mother was saying, "Oh man, I'm so bored with Shakespeare. Are we done with that already?" And I was like, "Hey, do you know Shakespeare invented all these words?" And then Kim, my wife, off the top of her head, did the whole soliloquy from Hamlet. I guess she memorized it when she was younger. Mm-hmm, and then her mom was like, "That's great. I should read that." I'm like, "Okay, what a turnaround from we should never talk about to like I gotta read the Hamlet right now." And of course, did you catch the? Just to drive the point home, of course, we have the love is blindness.
I did this time. I was paying enough attention to say, oh, that's what he was talking about.
Yes. And I recommend the YouTube version of that song, the original. This is not my cup of tea. By the way, we have, Darren from Australia has been co-hosting on some of these episodes recently. And we talked about The Agency briefly. And he says, I'll tell you something that didn't work for me was that soundtrack. And I'm just like, I'm right there with you. So I don't know how many fans this soundtrack actually has, this choice of music here. Oh, and a little bit of news about the show that I wanted to bring up is Sona, this has been renewed for season 2 right away. I'm not surprised.
Interesting.
But I'm not too surprised by that, considering it's based on that French show that I mentioned. The French show actually ran for 5 years. I thought it ran for 3. It actually ran for 5 years. I'm also not watching the show, which I was planning to sample, because I hear that although the whole milieu of the show is different, because obviously we're talking about the Ukraine, things that have only happened in the past few years, but structurally, I hear it's very similar. That, for example, the Fassbender character very much maps onto the lead character of the French show, and he also was mentoring a younger apprentice. There's a very similar scene where they're in a restaurant and she has to get the numbers for the contact information from those men, just like we saw in last week's episode. And also that there is this possible femme fatale. He's in a relationship with some woman. He doesn't know what her agenda might be. All that is to say that even though details are going to be completely different, I think structurally it's going to be similar. So it probably would be a spoiler. So if anyone out there was thinking about watching the shows in tandem, you probably want to wait for the season to end, just in case they mapped the plot points very similarly. And another thing that someone mentioned about the show, the original French show, you can see this already because you have like such a stacked cast. It's a show where like in season 2 or season 3, this secondary or tertiary character suddenly becomes central to the plot. And then you wonder, like, why do they have this, famous actress reading 2 lines of dialogue every single week? Mm-hmm. This is probably why, right? They're going to be important at some point in the future. All that is to say that Showtime obviously wants their version of Slow Horses, which is now approaching season 5 on Apple TV and has become a big hit. And they basically say, hey, we want to churn out one of these every year or so. Not sure if they can meet that timetable because of Fassbender and obviously Jeffrey Wright, very busy actors traditionally. So that's another question, but I figure they want to lock them in to some extent and announce the renewal right away. But it's also to speak to the fact that if the show is successful, which it is, Sona, biggest premiere, over 5 million viewers in the first week, which is a record for Showtime, even bigger, significantly bigger than the previous record, which was the Dexter New Blood series.
Interesting.
So just to speak to the fact that this is, obviously not a Dexter spinoff or something like that, and had huge ratings. So a big win for them. And obviously they're investing long-term in this. Like I said, I'm not sure with all these cast members if they can actually pull off a season per year, considering their availability, but all remains to be seen. But good signs that we are certainly going to see at least the second season of the show. Mm-hmm. And I had a couple more. Oh, one is I recommended to you, just available on Netflix yesterday, as we're recording this, Black Doves. Did you sample any of this?
In fairness to me, it's been less than 24 hours, Victor.
Oh, no, I didn't expect you to. I was just curious if you had.
No, I haven't.
What I would say in general, we'll probably have a spoiler conversation at some point in the future with somebody, if so, in case you can't get around to it. I mean, I know you have limited availability. We're already doing this show, and Dexter's coming in a week. So
soon, yeah.
We'll probably be watching that one too. But yeah, I would recommend this, especially I think as I'm watching The Day of the Jackal, which is just wrapping up next week, by the way, and these other series, the same idea of how the shows in the background, we very much dig into it in this particular episode of The Agency, by the way, have this question as to who are these people who would give away their pure identity to go undercover, and then also what is the cost of this on your psyche, and of course any of the interpersonal relationships. The Black Dove's different. I mean, it has a lot of action, a lot of shootouts, and some pretty grotesque punchlines to some of the action as well. And it's it's very funny, as well as being, I'd mentioned to you our text message that it's a very sad and poignant in ways. And that show, only 6 episodes long, but that show is all about the cost of this, the toll of it in being undercover for years and years, and then how you have to basically compartmentalize so many things, and then the cost of that emotionally. The plot gets a little overly convoluted. It doesn't go like science fiction or anything. It's, as a matter of fact, the stakes seem kind of mundane by the time we get to the end, although the conspiracy spirals outwards and outwards for multiple episodes, and the mystery of it is interesting. You're trying to wonder like who is actually behind all of these assassinations. It ends up being a little unsatisfying from a mystery standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint, it really works. As I mentioned, especially if anyone out there is watching these shows and you do wonder those things, like I wonder how this person got themselves into this circumstance, like what is their backstory, and how did they, live through this for so many years, and what's the mental cost of it. This show is all about that explicitly. So I think it's a good kind of companion to what we've been seeing here, like so many spy shows, but yet another good spy show, and all Christmas set too. So there's a lot of Christmas. It's like Love Actually meets Jason Bourne. And the cast is a lot of fun. All 3 leads, terrific. All right, so Hawk from a Handsaw, episode number 3 of The Agency. Any general takeaways before we get into the plot breakdown, Sona?
I enjoyed this. I actually wished it was maybe a little bit longer. I feel like the first 2 episodes, and I don't think this is unusual, the first 2 episodes did such a great job of pulling me in and having a lot of tense moments. And I feel like this didn't quite match that energy, but I also think that's to be expected. And I still enjoyed watching it. And I especially love the final scene with Martian and the therapist, because, as you touched on just now, and as we discussed last week, I think there is a very deep question here about the type of people that do this kind of undercover work and the effects on them. And I really, I loved the ending of this.
Yeah, I think there's 3 real standout moments, and one is 2 of them feature, or I guess all 3 of them feature Fassbender to some extent, really giving even more magnetic performance, I thought, here than he has in the first couple of episodes. A real intensity, obviously. 3 scenes that really stood out for me is one was the confrontation with Poppy.
Yes,
the
absolutely.
Other was the one is definitely the scene with the psychotherapist in that room, which of course is such a great scene that they previewed it in the trailer itself because they knew that's where the juice was. And then of course the very last scene, which we'll get around to, where he has that confrontation with Samia. Her woundedness there at the end is really good, but both of them, like him being so frustrated on the bridge, thinking to himself, like, what do I believe anymore, right? And it really captures a lot of these themes I was talking about even in Black Doves, but captures it all in just that one moment where he keeps pushing and pushing, and he has this paranoia, and he can't trust himself, and he can't trust her, and he doesn't know what to believe. And it's all, basically the whole spy dilemma in that one moment, his reaction. And then, of course, her performance as well.
Speaking of trailers, something happens when I watch this on demand on DirecTV. Not just this show, anything I watch on demand on DirecTV, where the last minute or so gets cut off. So I do want to tell you about what, and we can get there, the last thing I saw, and find out if anything happened after that.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I think we were doing some recap. Maybe it was Yellow Jackets. Maybe it was Dexter. where I would tell you, oh, and then there's the coming attraction at the end.
Yeah, right?
And Showtime does the coming attractions at the end, but I watched this on Paramount Plus, just reactivated my Paramount Plus account, by the way, with one of the discounts I mentioned during the Black Friday episode. And I think you were watching on Paramount Plus too. So whenever I would tell you, like, how about those coming next week episodes? And you're like, I don't know. Same thing with me. I'm like, I got to the end. I'm like waiting for the scenes. And it's just like Paramount Plus, the logo at the end. I'm like, oh, no trailer, I guess. Anyway, I guess we'll have to wait for the scenes on when it premieres on Showtime on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, never mind trailer. I'm not even sure I saw the end of the episode.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we'll get to the last moments. So anyway, the episode begins. What is the situation going on here? I was confused at the beginning of the episode.
Me too. And this reminded me, last week you said sometimes you don't love spy shows and movies.
Yeah.
And I didn't interject then. But the reason that I don't love them is because I often walk away feeling like I don't think I'm smart enough to watch this show. And that was another recurrence for me in the first few minutes of this. I thought, I'm not sure I'm getting this. So anyway, please go ahead. Maybe you can enlighten me.
I think this is unintentionally confusing because this is not something that requires this level of complexity. We see Fassbender's character, who we discover his birth name this episode. His name is Brandon, but goes by Martian, and of course goes by Paul also. So Martian / Paul / Brandon wakes up in his apartment. He's sleeping on the sofa, which I didn't understand at first, but of course it's because Poppy was there. And in a previous episode, he told her, whenever you want to stay over, you get the bed, I'll sleep on the sofa. And he has Bob Seger playing. That's him playing the night moves on.
Okay, that was the first confusing thing, is I didn't understand if that was music, if it was a neighbor singing, and then the thing comes in later the episode about the vents and the neighbor's weed, and I'm not sure what I was hearing. I mean, certainly Bob Seger's night moves, but I'm not sure where it was emanating from.
Well, it's good that you mentioned that the weed and because that might be the case, because maybe it is the neighbor who had the music playing, because I was confused by this, thinking, is he playing night moves for him to sleep to it? Because then wouldn't it be weird, even if he wants to listen to music when he goes to sleep, his daughter's in the other room? You may very well be right that night moves was coming from.
And then it felt like he went on the terrace and could still hear it. So then I thought.
And then Grandma and Grandpa, the agents in the car, are singing along to the music. So they're hearing it too. So it's obvious. So at first I'm like, is this just on the soundtrack? But it's like, no, they're listening to it too. And then I'm like, are they listening to it in the car? And they're like, no, because he can hear it in the apartment. I was just so confused. And it serves no purpose. It really serves no purpose to be this confused by this opening segment here. But anyway, Night Moves is playing on this. That's the important point. And I guess it's just the joke, right? Night Moves is all happening at night. Everyone's making their night moves.
Yes.
And he takes out, I'm still confused by this too. He takes out his burner phone from inside of the vent in the bathroom. He then goes and takes, I guess it's not his burner phone, right? It's his phone.
Okay, you're clarifying something that I did not pick up on. So, yeah, I don't think I understood the difference between those two phones. And I didn't understand how the agents in the car were saying, oh, the phone is alive or whatever, he's awake. And then he was going to the vent and taking out what I thought was the phone. And yeah, okay, so now that maybe explains it for me.
I actually rewound this for the same reason. I was slightly confused. And when he puts the phone down and he wraps it in the aluminum foil, which I didn't know was enough of, I know
either.
I know you could get, what is it? The Farrier cage, right? Which is like the little copper wiring. And they, if you go to tech companies, they'll actually have it on the windows so that people can't, use like an antenna to hop onto your Wi-Fi. So they put it this, like, they actually have it, these like little copper wiring inside the windows to block radio signal. So I know you could be like in a Farrier cage to keep any kind of radio signal. I didn't know you could just wrap it in aluminum foil. I mean, that's actually pretty cool, I guess, to learn that if you ever need to go incognito. But the weird thing about this, like you mentioned, I'm like, okay, so he's not wrapping his burner phone because they don't know about the burner phone. And then I did rewind and I looked at it, and the phone he puts down is like a flat phone. It's like, looks like an iPhone or an Android, like something like that.
Yes, I saw that too.
It's not like a Nokia, right? Which is what his burner is. Right?
Okay. Yes.
It's not a flip phone. So he then goes and wraps it up in foil. But then, so he's bringing his official phone with him. I don't understand why he wouldn't just leave it behind, theoretically. I guess unless it's like an emergency and he needs his phone something disastrous happens. But then if it's wrapped in foil the whole time, it's not like if they suddenly call him up, need him because there's some international incident occurring. His phone is wrapped in foil. It's not getting any signal. He can't use it anyway. So I'm not even sure why he brought that phone with him. I'm just still confused by that. And all this is so that he can sneak out of the apartment in the middle of the night and supposedly not disrupt his daughter. I guess he was checking to see if she was asleep. So he can make his escape. And he makes his night moves by heading across town and meeting up with Samia at a hotel. They know him by name when he arrives. So apparently he goes in there. But of course, very importantly, they know him by name. They know him by his alias, the burned alias. So not a smart move for him here. But of course, that's how she knows him. So he needs to keep that identity alive. Interesting hotel room. What'd you think of this hotel room?
Oh, I didn't give it all that much thought, actually. But was there something that you noticed about it specifically?
The one thing that kept distracting me is that the wall behind where the bed is like patched, intentionally distressed, which is really funny because I'm like, oh, is he like living in some, is this some kind of a rundown hotel? But I'm like, no, this has got it seems like a posh hotel. And then when they cut to the opposite way and you see the Jodie Turner-Smith character.
Yeah.
And they cut the other opposite way, you see that it actually is a very nice room. So I'm like, oh, this is it's probably an actual location, but it's weird, right? That they have this look that it is like an old, rundown location, but it's all just aesthetic. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on it. Okay. If you didn't notice, I just kept getting distracted. Like literally when they would cut back to him, I wasn't looking at him or him. I was looking at the wall and being like, why do they have those weird patches? Are they in the middle of construction or is this intentional? Anyway, I probably was paying attention to the wrong thing.
Usually that is something that would distract me, but for whatever reason, it didn't here.
And of course, in the middle of their rendezvous here, he's a little cold to her. He's very cold to her because, of course, he starts asking a lot of questions. In episode 2, he had gone to track her down at the conference she was supposedly attending to romantically pick her out. Oh, I was just going to surprise you and take you out to dinner. But of course, he was really checking in on her. And she turned out to not be there and hasn't been there the whole time. So, of course, he's a little cold. But then the phone rings. It's Jeffrey Wright's character, Henry, downstairs. And she's like, who is that? Oh, it's my publisher.
Insane.
He came here? What is happening? So at 1 o'clock in the morning, what? Yeah, he was getting there around midnight. So it's got to be later than that, obviously. And so anyway, so Henry's there. And even weirder, right, is that Henry not only tells him that he's there, he followed him via CCTV because he ditched his surveillance team and told him, look, you have to stick to the plan. And he's like, well, I have to go back. I have to tell her what's happening. He's like, no, you don't. I like his response here too, going but she'll get suspicious. And he's like, suspicious of what? This is a made up name. You got to walk the hell out of here. But he actually does. He knows that's the right thing to do. And he actually does walk off. And she happens to see this from the window. And of course, he then ghosts her on the phone too. So I like the fact that later on, he's telling her, well, my publisher was angry that I wasn't working on the book. And told me to get home right away and start working on it. And of course, which is all baloney. And just on its face is a ridiculous conversation. Even if that was the case, if you did that, you would immediately call the person and say, look, this is really weird, but I can't come back to the hotel room tonight. Right. And instead of just walking down the street and blowing off all her text messages. Very, very weird behavior, to say the least. And then you got to wonder, this is what that's the thing that makes her the most suspicious. How does she accept that at all, right?
Yeah, I guess it speaks to her understanding of maybe what is really going on, because in any normal relationship, you would be like, WTF? How could you do that to me?
It's exactly what she does via text message, but it's the fact that he then blows it off as I just go back and work on my book, which is not an excuse. That's bizarre enough. But then the fact that you would not communicate with me at all afterwards just seems incredibly shady.
But she doesn't seem to super hold it against him. I mean, she's like, what happened to you? But then she's kind of like, okay, moving on. Maybe it's different when you're having an affair, I guess. You're kind of like, where do I get off anyway? Asking questions. I don't know. If she is really having an affair, that's a whole other thing.
Right.
To me, it speaks to this many multi-layered relationship between them where a lot is unspoken.
And this happens in that Black Dove series I was recommending as well. But I thought that this crystallized a lot of the themes of that whole show in just one episode. It's the same idea that in a way she is a spy as well, because she has this relationship, potentially even on her cover story, if it is just a cover story, the relationship with her husband, who of course would not be cool with this at all in multiple ways. Even culturally, she could be putting her life at risk beyond just the obviously the animosity that you have with your husband if you found out that you were running around behind his back. But as you mentioned, it's curious because you could say, well, she's obviously an agent, right? How could she put up with this? But then there's also the fact that, well, she's cheating. So what's she going to hold him accountable to? And she knows nothing about him. She could just be thinking like he's married and he has his family and he's trying to break this off. And who am I to complain about the situation? This is untenable for me also, right? There is a logical explanation as to why she could be on the up and up.
I do think there is a feasible explanation out there where her story totally checks out, right? Like you're saying that we've talked about before in the context of other shows. There is this idea of don't ask questions you don't want to know the answers to. Some people do live by that. I have at times, where it's kind of like, listen, I've got enough going on. Can't add anything more to my plate. I'm not going to investigate this very strange thing that's happening.
Yeah, I've actually done that in the past too, where I think sometimes people will be like, I don't really want to talk about that. I think they are fishing for us, to dig up. And I'm like, if someone says that to me, I'm like, okay, then we won't talk about that. That's on you.
Good enough. Moving on.
So the next morning, we see that Bosco is talking to Dominic West, yet again, this CIA agent, or maybe the head of whatever their division is in the United States. And this is actually the one part of the show that's kind of annoying me, is that they're like, Felix has to go on. It has to go on. Felix. This is such a big deal. We don't even know what Felix means, but it's very important that we keep working. I'm just like, all right. Either tell us what Felix is or stop addressing it this way, because it's so annoying that they're like, we need the mission to continue. And they're like, I don't even know what the mission is. I'm like, okay, if no one knows what the mission is, how could you orchestrate the mission that you don't know exists, right? Like it's all of it is a little too much. Also just I'm assuming that, he's going to eventually make it onto the show, or maybe in a future season, he'll become central, or maybe the show will move to the United States. Who knows? These things are possible, but I think we're probably going to primarily see Dominic Purcell, not Dominic Purcell. What's this guy's?
West.
We're going to see Dominic West primarily.
I called him Monahan last week.
Yes.
I didn't know there were so many Dominics.
There's so many Dominics. I know. But we're going to see him primarily via Zoom or whatever the technology they use, the secured version of it.
I wonder if he had another commitment and this is all he could do.
This is all he could do. It's like that show. I'm sure you haven't seen this, but that show like Landman, they have like John Hamm and Demi Moore are in that show. And they're all this like an all-star cast. And most of them are either on John Hamm's only on the phone. Demi Moore is seen in the background, like swimming in the pool.
Funny.
Billy Bob Thornton's wife is only on Zoom. So it's like they can only get these people to like zoom in from whatever show they're doing. But they're like headliners on the show. They're like, don't worry, you just have to be don't worry, John Hamm, you just have to be on the phone for 2 or 3 scenes per episode while you shoot your other show, which we'll probably be covering here on the podcast. One thing that we assume about Felix is that is definitely related to Henry's brother-in-law's mission, right? They're definitely either they are Felix or they are facilitating Felix in some way, the operation.
Yeah, because they also had that conversation in the prior episode of like Jeffrey Wright saying, I'm going to say a name, and if I'm correct, don't say anything. I can't remember exactly how he set it up, but he said Felix, and he got the signal from the brother-in-law that it is Felix.
There's a little digression here when we see that Russian operative from last week inside the shipping container, where he was being beat up, and they're basically letting him go, and they're like, sorry about everything that happened. And he's not very happy about the situation, but I guess, hey, now he's in London, so they just wanted to make sure he was on the up and up, and so you might have lost a couple of teeth, sorry about that. But and of course they're all very concerned, meeting up about Henry's brother-in-law, whose name I don't remember off the top of my head, but that whole operation. And now they're in the woods, and Fassbender's character Martian comes up with a way to identify them, looking for not a heat signature, but a heat signature that was there and quickly disappeared. And of course, they do use that to track them down. and they extricate him. And then later that day, we see that Fassbender eventually gets back home. And this is the first of like some really standout scenes here in this episode. Some of the spy stuff was a little, flat for me. It was fine. I mean, it moves the plot forward, but really didn't stand out in a lot of these ways. And they're also playing all this, peekaboo with, how much they can tell us about what this Felix operation is really about. So there's a lot of that type of thing, which is fine. It's expected, but it doesn't really knock my socks off. But the scenes that really stood out were those interpersonal ones. And
agree.
The first one that really is a really good one is when he gets home and the daughter is there. She's watching SpongeBob very loud. He smells marijuana in the air. He thinks it's her smoking marijuana in the house all day. She's giving him the cold shoulder. He thinks she's high. And I like all the tension of this and the misunderstandings and how he's, once again, over and over again, we see in this episode, he's making a lot of presuppositions of the way people are acting with him and misreading what's actually happening. And she's like, oh, I'm not high. I'm just pissed off at you. And by the way, I went around this house and I found out your fake identity. And if I can do that, then hey, these agents are definitely going to be able to do that. I have the SpongeBob episode on so loud because I'm assuming that there are people who are listening in on our conversation. But of course, she starts saying a little too much without being aware that she's saying too much, using his previous alias, etc. And this, of course, makes it like a switch flip in him. And he starts acting, immediately goes into, hostile witness.
Yeah.
And throws her into the bathroom, turns the water on. And you really see that switch flip first to the violent version of himself, and then immediately turning back off again, going like, what am I doing? This is my daughter. But obviously she is not prepared for that at all.
The damage is done.
The damage is done for sure. And I just thought this was terrific. It just like captures all of this in one shot, in one scene. It captures all of that tension. What do you think Poppy's thinking at this moment, by the way?
It's the innocence in a way of being young. Is like, she's not realizing the implications of what she's discovered here. And she's just thinking about how it affects her and her relationship with her father. Right. And that's all she can see, right? And that's why she approaches it with this self-righteousness, right? And not seeing the big picture of really what her father is involved in and the repercussions of that. So I thought it was like a nice contrast of, when you talk to a child and their universe is so closed because, we try and shelter our children from all of these bigger things that they're inevitably going to find out. And never mind this like world of espionage and global politics. So like the contrast and, and he's trying to say, you have no idea what is really going on here. Right. And that's why the switch flips, is because it's something so serious, but she's just seeing a father-daughter relationship.
I'm always a fan of Fassbender in his performances when he's not making more popular stuff. Like I forgot to mention when you were unaware of who he was. He made some very, I mentioned the Alien movies he was in, but of course he played Magneto, the young version of Magneto in all those X-Men movies. I think 4 of them actually. So that's kind of how I know you haven't seen those movies. So, but I'm sure your husband has, by the way. But
probably at least one, yeah.
Some of the most popular ones they have, he was the star of. But in those films, he's fine, but it's not really him at his best. But I do recommend very highly for anybody out there, especially if anyone has been watching that series, which I highly recommended here on the podcast, Say Nothing, about the Troubles in Ireland. Oh, and by the way, Steve McQueen, the Academy Award winning director of 12 Years a Slave, they both came up together. His first 4 movies all featured Michael Fassbender. And his very first one is about Bobby Sands. So I don't know if you know who Bobby Sands is, but he is the IRA operative who was arrested and went on hunger strike and eventually died of, starving himself to death. And Fassbender plays Bobby Sands, and the movie is called Hunger. And he lost an incredible amount of weight. Like he is skin and bones by the end of that film. He's pretty gaunt here in this film, by the way. Also,
I agree. He's very thin. Yeah.
He's very lean all the time, but he's extraordinarily lean. And I forget how much weight he lost, but it's an insane amount of weight he lost there. And, that's the type of thing that gets a lot of attention for.
Of course.
But the film itself is really fascinating. And the centerpiece of that film, if you liked this interrogation scene, is Fassbender's character playing Bobby Sands again, talking to a priest. And the priest is trying to talk him out of starving himself to death. And it is like a 15-minute scene, unbroken, where they go back and forth over the ideological and philosophical beliefs on committing suicide and the aspects of that and the morality of it, etc. I would recommend Sona, even if you don't watch the entire film, I think you can just see that scene on YouTube, and this is the scene that basically made Fassbender into a star. But anyway, intersecting with a bunch of things. It's about the troubles in Ireland. It's about Fassbender. It's Steve McQueen's first movie. Steve McQueen, of course, just has the movie Blitz, is on Apple TV Plus right now for anybody who wants to catch up on that. It's now available to stream there. And of course, intersecting very much so with the intensity he brings to this scene in the interrogation room. But you see some of that intensity in that moment when he's
for sure
with her in the bathroom. And he goes immediately into like, don't mess with me. Don't you understand what's at stake here? This is dangerous. But of course, this is just his daughter. And she's like obviously really upset about this interaction with her dad, who she hasn't seen in 6 years, right? And now this is
probably a side of him that she's never seen before.
Absolutely
so
not. Right.
All of a sudden seeming like a total stranger, right? In a lot of ways. She's
trying to do this investigation of the apartment and get to know him in some way and try to confront him to be like, you're still lying to me about who you are. And then when she sees what is under the cover, she's just like, wow, maybe I don't want to know what's under there. Oh, I do want to bring something up that happens. There is some sly humor in this writing as well. I liked when Grandma and Grandpa are in the car and one guy reprimands him for calling the subway instead of calling it the tube or the underground. And he says, didn't you just call it an elevator instead of a lift, of course? So I think that was funny that they're like saying, oh, wait, did that bother you? But the best part, the punchline that pays off later is when Bosco confronts him and goes, oh, so how are things? Are you settling in? Everything okay? And he goes, how do you like your flat? Which, of course, is telling him because his daughter says it's not an apartment, it's a flat.
Yes.
So he's just saying, like, I got briefed on everything that happened yesterday between you and your daughter.
Exactly.
So just a little reminder, but I like all these, how they're using these differences between the language to make these broader points. And then we do see that extraction. What did you think about the sequence in the woods here as an action scene or just as character development here for Henry's brother-in-law?
I thought it was a nice contrast to, the other types of scenes, which are, the kind I love, a lot of people talking. It was good to like change the tempo and change the mood a little bit. And as I mentioned, I'm growing to like this brother-in-law character quite a bit. So it was nice to see more of him. I like kind of the tactics in action of pouring the water on the engine and, hiding in the forest. I found it interesting. How about you?
Yeah, I liked it. I think I liked more how it breaks up the action here and reminds us that these people are actually in the field instead of making this all closed in. I think from an execution standpoint, I felt like all the in the field action this episode was pretty perfunctory. Most of the spy stuff, honestly, was pretty perfunctory here. Not in a negative way. It's just expected, but solid. Like if I watch Slow Horses and it's not that different from what you would expect to see in a spy show. Although the office setting is very different there than this one. But still, it's kind of, I'm not surprised by any of it, but I think it works. And like I said, I think most of all, it serves a good purpose, which is to break things up. Like you said, we're just stuck in an office the whole entire time. And also to remind us that it's very easy, oftentimes in spy shows, to be so claustrophobic in your perspective that you forget that someone could die from this. So it's good to know the people in the field because they're the ones whose necks are on the line here, depending on if they screw up or not, which of course makes the stakes higher. And of course, doubling down on that is the fact that, this could be terrible for Henry's marriage as well if she gets his brother-in-law murdered.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And then of course we get to the last 10 or 15 minutes of this episode, which are just incredible. The
Terrific.
Whole episode up until this point for me, the episode's mostly, dotting I's and crossing T's and moving some of the plot lines slowly forward. But then the last 10 minutes or so are just one banger after another, except for one thing that really bothered me, and I'll get to it. But the first, of course, is the whole confrontation between the psychotherapist, Dr. Blake, meeting with Martian, or Brandon, as she calls him here. It's his actual given name. And this is just great writing and great performances here. This dynamic change where she is putting him on his back foot and then how he turns it on her. I think he's just such a great job that when she won't let him answer the question. And he's like, why are you being defensive? And he's so cold in the way he says that. And you really get to see how he operates. We've seen this a little bit in the previous episodes where he is manipulating in this very stoic way. And I think it's really great where he's like putting her suddenly on a defensive. She suddenly stops talking because she's like, okay, I'll let you answer. It's really weaponizing her own position as a way to take control of the conversation. I thought it was just masterclass.
I agree. It was great to just watch this dynamic between them and kind of watch her be taken off guard a little bit, or at least appearing to be, by how difficult he's being, and all of it, him trying to gain control of how the dynamic is playing out. All of it was just so entertaining. And the substance of the conversation was great too.
For anyone who's seen the trailer before, this, of course, is in there. This whole idea that he's saying what you're worried about is not that I'm insane. What you're worried about is that I've become sane because you need to be insane to do this job. And he goes, so don't worry, doctor. I am 100% insane. I am nuts, but nuts, not too nuts. I won't come in here and shoot the place up, but just nuts enough to keep doing this job.
Which is, something that we talked about last week, right? Of who wants to do that?
Exactly. Right. Now, here's the thing that I found really annoying. The one misstep in this whole entire thing. Okay. As soon as he's saying this, you got to be nuts to do this job. Don't worry, I'm insane. I'm trying to prove to you that I'm sane, supposedly, but actually I'm insane. Sona, what does that make you think about? Does it make you think about Catch-22?
A little too on the nose for you?
Yes. So as I'm listening to this, I'm like, that's the whole Catch-22. And I'm like, let's go to the very next scene to go watch Catch-22. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, what is going on here? So for anyone who hasn't read Catch-22, here is Catch-22 from Joseph Heller's novel of the same name. It says, there was only one catch, and that was Catch-22, which specified that a concern for one's safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind, or was crazy and could be, or the character's name, by the way, or was crazy and could be grounded. All he had to do was ask. And as soon as he did, he would no longer be crazy and he would have to fly more missions, or would be crazy to fly more missions and sane if he didn't. But if he was sane, he had to fly them. If he flew them, he was crazy and didn't have to. But if he didn't want to, he was sane and had to. That's the whole idea, that if you are sane, you can't do this job. But if you're insane, you can do this job. But then you have to prove that you're sane so you can do the job. And that's endless loop, which he's talking about in the previous scene. We can't leave well enough alone. We have to actually go and see Catch-22 with Samia. And then that's at least the context was very distracting to me, by the way. The fact that the movie was even playing in the background was really annoying me, but it didn't fully take away from the fact of the content of this conversation, where he's confronting her in the movie theater and she is just outraged. I like when she just he's interrogating her like a suspect and she just gets up and walks off. She's like, I don't have to actually stay here for this. I could just walk out the door. And of course, that's where he's so conflicted on the final moments on the bridge. And yeah, all these interactions starting in the movie theater, but then especially on the bridge, were really just terrific. I thought they were really well done.
I agree. They were very well done. And as far as what is really going on with her, I will say, if you didn't want to call attention to yourself, you probably wouldn't dress in head to toe red.
That's a good point. The color's not the most.
I mean, she
subtle.
was a striking figure.
Yeah, I'm actually rewatching that episode on the bridge, and the fact that she's in red and like everyone else is like in black and tan, she really stands out there.
Yeah, so all of this was terrific, but this is my question for you in these final minutes.
Yeah.
The last thing that I saw, maybe it's the last thing in the episode, is, this person who has been following her, who we haven't been given much information as to why he's following her and who he is, has pulled over to the side and gotten out of the car, and she sees him. And then my episode ended.
Oh, you missed it then. Wow. You missed about a minute of the show, and important minute of the show. So he flags her down. This character's name, by the way, looking at IMDb, is Osman, although we have not been introduced to him. I forgot to bring up that he's been watching her from probably her whole entire stay here, because he's watching her at the hotel, and you assume that she arrived at the hotel. That's not her hotel. That's the hotel room under Paul's alias. So he had to follow her to this hotel, and probably knows who she met there, and obviously took a picture actually with his phone of her getting into the fight on the bridge with the Fassbender character. She's not surprised to see this guy. It's not like she's like, who is this? What? He didn't have to like grab her and say, I'm here on behalf of your husband or whatever. So she knows who he is. I do not believe this is her husband. I think if it was her husband, she probably would get in the front seat. Oh, you hadn't seen that part. She gets into the car.
I did not see her get in the car.
Well, I'll tell you what happens. She gets into the car. She gets into the back seat. There's no dialogue for the rest of the episode. He eyes her through the rearview mirror. They pull out into traffic. But the most important thing is she looks at him in the rearview mirror, and then she looks straight ahead, and they just continue to drive for, this is probably like 30 or 40 seconds. They hold this shot, and her eyes start to well up with tears. So I think it's very important, because if you're thinking like, oh, she's just an operative or whatever, maybe she did start as an operative just like Martian did, but this is an emotional thing for her. So, and you could imagine if she's just going to go see her husband, and this is somebody who's like her husband's driver or something, so she knows who he is. You could imagine her being scared, or her trying to figure out a story to tell. But the fact her face just softens and she starts to cry after that conversation, immediately after the conversation with Martian, makes me think that she does have actual feelings for him. So I think you missed it. And I actually think it's important, because it is.
Yeah.
It tells you a lot about her motivations, I think.
I really hope that somebody somewhere is complaining about this, because I don't want to, but we can't continue like this with you telling me all of the critical things that happened in the last minute of the episode. Does
this happen on all the episodes you've watched?
This happens on DirecTV if I search for a show and watch it through what comes up through the search results. So I'll have to try navigating through it some other way, although I don't know why my result would be any different if I did.
Well, it might be different, because when you are playing it through DirecTV, you're getting it from the on-demand, which I think sometimes those streams, even the video quality is down on my cable box, is not very good. I would recommend just go through the Paramount Plus app.
Okay.
And you'll probably get a much higher quality, higher resolution image as well, because it's definitely going to be high def. Yeah, and then you can get to see the last moment. You can actually go back to the last 3 episodes and watch the last minute of each one. Yeah.
Plus the trailers, because I love trailers.
Yeah. Although if you're watching through Paramount Plus, I don't think I don't know if you
don't get the
Showtime
trailers.
Has its own. I think Showtime does have its own streaming. Maybe that one has it, but then you'd have to probably wait until Sunday, because I think they don't premiere until Sunday on Showtime. Anyway, I saw it on Paramount Plus, so no trailers for next. Yeah, so that's the episode. Are you intrigued? Are you continue to be intrigued?
Yeah, I am definitely interested in how this develops. I really like it so far, and I'm able to, for the most part, keep up with the plot so far. So that's exciting for me.
Always a plus when you can follow the plot.
Yes, when I can actually follow the story. Yes.
Yeah, I'm still very interested. I like the characters. For me, this might be a ding for people. I've been reading some of the online reviews. The reviews from the critics have been mediocre, by the way, which I'm surprised. Some people were surprised that this had such a weak Rotten Tomato score. Unlike a lot of shows where the entire series is released to critics, when I read through some of the reviews, that positive and negative, they were saying the 2 episodes that were made available to us, and some of the critics were saying the 3 episodes that were made available. So critics are basing this on either the first 2 or 3 episodes, which is 2 things. One is those negative reviews don't actually encompass the full season of the show. Maybe there are certain twists that are to come that they want to keep under wraps. But more importantly, I think, is the negative reaction to these first 3 episodes, which I think all 3 episodes have been very good.
I agree.
I'm not sure what they saw that were like, that was terrible. Yeah, I'm like, really? That was terrible? I mean, I can understand them being like, well, it's not moving as fast as I want. That I can understand.
Sure. Yeah.
But this is terrible. Sure. I don't think, who's going to see this and think it's terrible? I don't know. It's a very strange reaction to me. I have heard some of the general audience reactions saying that the show moves too slowly. But for me, and I think this is an acquired taste, like, your mileage may vary. But for me, that's my favorite part about spy shows is all the duplicity and the way you can't even trust yourself sometimes. All of that is really fascinating. If I just want to see people like shoot at each other, like I understand the appeal of like the Jason Bourne spy shows. And I do like those Jason Bourne.
Oh, I think they're great. Yeah.
But that's not my favorite version of that. If I only had the Jason Bourne version of spy shows, I wouldn't be as intrigued with them. It's the same thing I liked about Severance in a way. It's like, the things you do to yourself, and then who are you after you make some of these decisions? All those things I think are really fascinating, the psychology of it. And that's why I like conspiracy thrillers as well. And spy shows.
Yeah, a great example of a slow moving but fantastic spy movie is The Good Shepherd.
Right, exactly.
Very long movie in my mind, but worth it. And I don't often say that about very, very long movies.
All the Le Carre works are like this as well, right? Like they are usually not a lot of action, and it's mostly the character dynamics that are being explored there, especially when you're potentially like a mole in an agency, and how do you hide your identity from other agents, right? When everybody's keeping their own secrets, etc. So anyway, I think that stuff's really fun, and this show is that primarily, I think. But it has the action elements as well. So, I mean, for me, it's working really well.
I agree with you completely.
And we will touch base again next week. In the near future, I will definitely, I've already edited it, Sona. Our audio quality back then was terrible, by the way. I'm going to republish those the Severance recap episodes. I tried to clean up the audio as much as I could. But anyway, I improved it a little bit. But man, I'm like, wow, these files might have been really compressed on the old platform I used to use, something. But anyway, I'll republish those. And also, of course, The Day of the Jackal's wrapping up in just a week or so. And we'll continue with this show. And if you watch the Dexter premiere episode next week, I don't think we're going to go week to week on that show. Probably not worth it. But I would be curious to at least have like a review of what you think about this new cast and the time frame it's set in for the new Dexter show. And since, of course, it's also available on Paramount Plus, we can probably dip into it a couple of times over the course of the season. After being burned on that last Dexter show, I don't think I'm going to go week to week on it. But
yeah, no, I'm super curious about this, and the cast seems very promising as well.
Yeah, agreed. But I mean, even I think about that pretty bad Dexter series. I think if I'd watched it like as a binge, it would be at the end, I'd be like, that was fine. It had some good parts. But, us going week to week on it, I'm like, I don't think this is, I don't think I can like talk. I don't think I can watch regrets. This. Right. To watch it and then to like analyze it afterwards. I'm like, I don't know if this is worth it. As opposed to just kind of watch the whole thing and be like, just let it wash over you and be like, okay, well, there was some good scenes in there somewhere.
That was that.
That was that. Yeah. That happened. Oh, and by the way, Sona, I think you know this already, but spoilers, everybody out there, you can tune out right now. But when you watched the finale of that season of Dexter, is Dexter dead?
Wait, are we talking about regular Dexter or New Blood?
We're talking Dexter.
I mean, he was going into like an awful storm in a tiny boat.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. I mean, Dexter New Blood, the character Dexter in Dexter.
Both times he should be dead.
Right. But at least in the previous version, we saw that he like was in his Wolverine lumberjack mode at the end, right? So we know that he did survive, right? Explicitly. Even though he should have died, absolutely. He drove into a storm and should have died in the hurricane. But in Dexter New Blood, he explicitly is dead, right? There's no ambiguity about the fact that he died at the end of that show, right?
I don't remember thinking there was any.
He shot him in the chest, right? And he didn't have like a bulletproof jacket on or anything.
No.
I mean, I think the whole point at the end is he's like telling his son to kill him.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think that was kind of part of the plot, is that it was going to end that way.
Well, Sona, this summer we have Dexter Resurrection, because Dexter is not dead. Michael C. Hall is back and he's alive. They can't leave anything alone. What is happening?
Just let it be.
I mean, unless he comes back as a zombie, I'm not watching that shit. He's got to be a zombie. I'll buy it if he's just like, when he shot him and there was like something, he was on consecrated ground and had to come back as a vengeful angel or something, I'll buy if it's a supernatural rebirth. I will watch that show, even if it's crazy. But if it's just like, oh, he just missed my heart, like as soon as he walked away, my heart started beating again. I'm like, oh, come on. What's the point of that show? What's the point of any of this? Oh, God. Anyway, I guess I need to find out why he's alive. That other than that, I don't want to watch that show.
But or how he's alive. Yeah.
How? Right. How? All right. Anyway. So that's all to come. But I actually do not mind the prequel. I like the cast, like you mentioned. I like that setting, like seeing him become the Dexter we knew.
Yes.
For anybody out there who needs to catch up on Dexter, as part of that prequel, I honestly would say just watch season 1 of Dexter. Like really, just watch season 1 of Dexter. It's on Netflix right now. It's on Netflix right now. It's all you would need for the prequel, and it tells you everything that you're curious about. Speaking of these dual identities and how I like these kind of psychological thrillers in general, whether they're spies or not, that's the thing that's fascinating about Dexter. Dexter is basically a secret agent. But what he does is he kills people. He kills serial killers, but it's because he is a serial killer. He likes to kill people. So the idea that he has to try to behave like a regular human while he is killing these people, and this interior narrative he has all the time, observing how people who are quote unquote normal are really not that normal. It's just different ways that people deal with hiding their own limitations. So all of that is really fascinating in that first season of the show. If you're going to go beyond season 1, you really only need season 2, and then you really should stop. I mean, there's some good stuff along the way, by the way. Season 4, by the way, pretty good too. But I mean, really, it's all diminishing returns, So season 1, watch it. Fantastic. It's all you need for the prequel. That's it. That's all you would need. All the stuff about like how this code that he lived with and his relationship with his dad, everything you think you need to know. All the characters are introduced in season 1, and it's fantastic. And then season 2, pretty good. I'd say it's really good for about 3/4 of the way. The ending's not great. The rest of it is pretty solid, very solid, I would say. And then season 3 is a disaster. And season 4 is good, but like I said, you could just quit after season 2 or even season 1 and get 90% of what you need right there.
I agree. You know what's so interesting, and now I'm going off on a tangent, but I think since the time that season 1 or since Dexter was around, which was, I have no sense of time passing, but it seems like a while ago now.
Sona, it's almost 20 years since.
There you have it.
It's insane. So, I think it's 18 years since the season.
In that intermittent time, well, first of all, we both have small children, so probably this is more front of mind than it had been. But I just think there's been so much more autism awareness.
Yes.
And recognition of people being on the spectrum and things like that. And hearing you describe Dexter right now,
yes,
it reminds me a lot of how people talk about having autism and masking and trying to figure out through social cues, oh, this is what people should do right now. So I'll put a concerned look on my face, or, that kind of idea that like people with autism struggle with how to behave in a way that we generally think of as normal in our society. So bringing that to it, I'm kind of starting to wonder if maybe Dexter had autism, but not to say that that makes him any more likely to be a serial killer. That's a whole other thing.
Right.
And they established the childhood trauma that set a lot of this into motion. Right. But it's just interesting to me that the descriptors of how Dexter is struggling are very similar to how we talk about people with autism needing to mask.
Yeah, I think that is, even when I was describing it right now, and that even at the time, I felt like it was that metaphor, not so much in the serial killing, obviously, but all of the masking, like you described, which is if you hear people who have Asperger's, they describe their experience of, reflecting people's expressions back at them, which, by the way, I think that's what I think is interesting about having this almost alien perspective that he offers. And also listening to people who have Asperger's and talking about how they are trying to behave a certain way because they know they have this social limitation. I find that very interesting to have them describe that, because I think to some extent, and this is once again the appeal of Dexter as well, we all do that. It's just that we don't have to think as hard about it. So it's interesting to have someone like that. Here's an older reference, even older reference that your husband would appreciate even more than you, is Data on Star Trek, where he once again is always like trying to look at people. And he even says this out loud, like, I'm acting this way. I'm making these facial expressions to make you more comfortable, right? And that is what we do, right? We do that. Like Side is saying, like, oh, I should, up my energy, like on a job interview, or I'm going to smile back. That wasn't a funny joke, but I'm going to laugh at her joke anyway because I'm trying to impress them or whatever. We do this, but we don't sit down and analyze it as we're doing it unless we are in one of these circumstances where I'm trying to get my kid into this school program or something, right? And you have to like intentionally mirror people that you wouldn't hang out with normally, right? Or that are a little odd sometimes. And you're like, well, you might work with people who are very different from you socially and are sensitive about different things. Like my manager really hates when this happens. So now all of a sudden it is a priority to me, but only when I'm in the office. So all those type of things that you do, I find it very funny to have Dexter narrating, saying like, oh, because I'm like this, I have to do these behaviors. And I'm like, dude, Dexter, just to let you know, we all do that every single day. Yes. We all do that, right? So it's but that's funny, right? There's where the comedy of Dexter comes from, is exactly those observations where he goes, it's so strange the way normal people are because they act like this. And you laugh at that because you're like, yeah, that's right. That happens all the time. Like, and that's what makes season 1 of that show and the writing in it so good, so great. And I feel like people watch that whole entire show just on the strength of that first season.
Yeah, I agree. I probably did because there were some low moments there.
And there's some good moments. I mean, I want to say that if you do suck it up and go all the way to the end, you really do not need to watch the last 2 seasons. That's really where you need to pull the plug. But, if you do decide to watch like the first, 5 or 6 seasons of that show, way too many seasons, that there's a lot of good stuff.
John Lithgow, right?
Yes.
Up through John Lithgow is great.
Well, except for season 3. Season 3, yeah. So season 1, season 2, skip season 3, just watch the recap at the beginning of season 4. And then all of season 4 is actually very good. So yeah, that's if you want to have an abbreviated viewing experience, the best possible Dexter viewing experience, it's season 1, season 2, skip season 3, and then the only
I cannot emphasize enough. Skip season 3.
It's really bad. Like really.
Which one was season 3? Was that the Colin Hanks one?
No, that was horrible too.
Because I would skip that.
You definitely want to skip that one. No, season 3 is the Jimmy Smits one. It's awful.
I actually would put Colin Hanks as worse than Jimmy Smits. Personally,
I agree with that as a show, as a season of television. It's really bad. I agree. There's like nothing happens in that show. And the twist that comes at the very, very end, it's like, I knew that in episode 1. Like
everyone figured it out. Yeah.
It's awful. The reason I hate season 3 so much is because it's such a betrayal to the Dexter character. Dexter starts setting, and this is spoilers again for everybody, but Dexter starts to like goad the Jimmy Smits character. He frames him for a murder. And when Smits confronts him about it, cackling and pointing at him. And I'm like, Dexter would do this because he needs to cover his own trail. He would not take pleasure in it. Like it's such a betrayal to the Dexter character in every possible way. It literally is like someone else wrote the character. He has a killer who's delighting in the murdering and everything. And I'm like, what? It's just not the Dexter character in it. So for me, I hate season 3 because it completely betrays everything we know about the Dexter character. And then, by the way, they were very conscientious of this because in season 4, he goes right back into being his more stoic, autistic-like character. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what happened to season 3, but I don't know if they got different writers or something.
Yeah.
But they it's like, yeah. But that's also a terrible episode where that's a terrible season where nothing interesting happens either. The Jimmy Smits character actually becomes his antagonist and then disappears for like 2 or 3 episodes in the middle of the season. Like it's just awful. It's just awful. But yeah, the Colin Hanks one, holy cow, what a train wreck.
Holy cow. Yeah.
And then of course the whole final season too, which I don't remember anything about except for the ending, but even like the big bad there, the way that gets resolved is so stupid.
The dynamics with the sister, that got really weird.
Yeah. Anyway, that's just, yeah. Boy, that'd be we need like a 4-part podcast episode just to break
I mean,
down.
we did once go through, I think before this New Blood Dexter.
We went season by season,
Season by season briefly. And I mean, I don't think our opinions have changed. So,
no.
Yeah.
All right, Sona, thank you again for the
Thank you.
And we will touch base next week and talk about The Agency and maybe review the first episode of the new Dexter show as well.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.